His gaze, usually fixed on the middle distance of his own carefully managed obligations, caught a flash of dark fabric beneath the surface of the river crest. It was a woman's dress, almost entirely submerged, moving with the slow indifference of the current. He dismounted with a speed that bypassed every consideration of rank or consequence. Dropping to the frozen bank, he broke through the ice shelf with his gloved fist and found her, Lily Harper. Her skin the color of the snow surrounding her, her body surrendered entirely to the cold. He did not call for his man, he did not calculate. Edmund Ashford, 6th Duke of Everley, gathered her against his chest and held her head above the water and did not think about a single thing except getting her out. Sometimes the most consequential decision a man ever makes is the one he makes without thinking. England, 1814. The winter that settled over the Ashford estate that January was a merciless, bone-deep thing, a frost that had been building since November, layering itself over the grounds until the river crest disappeared beneath a skin of gray ice, and the roads between the estate and the village became impassable suggestions of themselves. It was a landscape that had turned inward, that offered nothing to anyone caught outside its shelter. On the morning of the 14th, Edmund Ashford rode the northern boundary of his estate with the particular tension of a man managing, beneath an immaculate exterior, the pressure of a life arranged entirely by other people's expectations. At 32, he was a duke who performed his duties with precision and felt them with nothing at all. Or so he had concluded. He had not yet met the woman currently beneath the surface of the river crest, who would prove that conclusion comprehensively wrong. Welcome to the Inner Circle. You're watching Heiress Diaries, where we unlock the high-stakes lives of the elite. Pull up a chair. We have many more stories to tell, so make sure you're here for the next entry. He had been riding the northern boundary for the better part of an hour, which was not unusual. Edmund rode when the weight of the correspondence on his desk became specific and oppressive, when the letters from his solicitor and his mother and the 3 men who managed various portions of his estate accumulated into a particular kind of pressure that had no clean resolution and required, instead, the simple mechanics of movement and cold air. He was 32 years old and had been the Duke of Everley for 11 of those years, inheriting the title at an age when he had not yet finished becoming a person, which meant the title had done a considerable portion of that work for him. He was not certain, on certain mornings, where the Duke ended and Edmund began. Riding the boundary was how he reminded himself that the question existed. He saw her at the bend where the river crest curved beneath the old stone arch. The dark fabric was moving strangely against the ice, not floating freely, but caught, pulled by the current beneath a shelf that had partially given way. He registered it as wrong before he understood what he was seeing, and he was off his horse and on the bank before he had formed any thought that could be called a decision. The ice at the edge broke under his weight, and the cold came up through his boots immediately, the particular cold of January river water that is less a temperature than a fact. He found her arm, then her shoulder, then pulled. She came free of the current with the terrible passivity of someone entirely unconscious, and Edmund got his arm beneath her and her head above the water and hauled them both onto the bank with the clumsy, graceless urgency of a man who has never done this before and is doing it anyway. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. The pulse was there, faint, irregular, but present. Her skin was the color of the ice around them. Her lips had gone a pale, frightening blue. He did not wait for his groomsmen. He gathered her against his chest, remounted with considerable difficulty, and rode for Ashford Hall at a pace the frozen ground did not encourage, and he did not moderate. Mrs. Hewitt, his housekeeper, met him in the entrance hall with the adaptable efficiency of a woman who had managed the unexpected for 30 years, and within 20 minutes the unknown woman was in the blue guest room, warmed and tended and breathing with more steadiness than the river had left her with. Edmund stood in the corridor outside the door and became aware, gradually, that he was soaking wet and shaking slightly, and had not thought once from the moment he saw the fabric in the water until this moment about anything except her. By nightfall, the snow had closed the roads. By morning, it had sealed them entirely. What had been a single impulsive act of rescue became by the simple arithmetic of weather and geography an arrangement with no foreseeable conclusion, and Edmund stood at his study window watching the white accumulate and understood, with the precision that had always been his most reliable instrument, that he had no idea what came next. She was conscious by the second morning and asking for work by the afternoon of the same day. Mrs. Hewitt relayed this to Edmund with the expression of a woman who had encountered most varieties of human behavior in 30 years of service and was genuinely uncertain which category this one belonged to. The young woman, who by then had identified herself as Lily Harper, former governess, lately of Whitmore House before a dismissal she described with brief precision and no apparent self-pity, had declined the breakfast tray brought to her room, dressed herself without assistance, and appeared in the kitchen doorway asking what needed doing. Edmund received this information at his desk and returned to his correspondence, which was the appropriate response. She was a guest, temporarily, by circumstance rather than design. Mrs. Hewitt would manage the situation. This was not a complication that required his attention. He found her on the third day in the morning room. He had come looking for the Hargreaves letter, which he had last seen on the writing table by the east window, and instead found Lily Harper on her knees beside the bookshelf, reorganizing its contents with the focused efficiency of someone who had identified a problem and resolved to address it regardless of whether the problem was hers to address. The morning room had not been properly attended to since his aunt had departed the previous autumn, and it showed. A disorder that was familiar enough to Edmund that he had stopped seeing it, which was apparently not a condition Lily shared. She looked up when he entered, did not scramble to her feet, did not apologize. "The cataloging system on the lower shelf makes no sense," she said. "Someone appears to have organized by color." Edmund looked at the shelf. "My aunt." "Ah," she returned to the books. "I've left the top two shelves as they were. I wasn't certain how attached you might be to the arrangement." He should have told her to leave it. It was not her room and not her household, and she was here by accident rather than invitation, recovering from a river that had nearly killed her 3 days prior. He was aware of all of this. What he said instead was, "I'm not attached to it." She nodded and continued working. He found the Hargreaves letter on the writing table exactly where he had left it and stood for a moment longer than retrieval required. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 2 days. It doesn't suit me." She didn't look up. "I'll stop if you'd prefer, but I'd rather be useful than comfortable, and the room needed doing." Edmund looked at her, on her knees on the floor of his morning room, entirely self-possessed, demonstrably uninterested in performing gratitude for his benefit, and found that he had no prepared response for any of this. Every person in his household spoke to him with a particular, careful calibration. She was not calibrating at all. He took the letter and left. He thought about the conversation for the remainder of the day, which was inconvenient, and again the following morning, which was more so. The snow did not relent. By the end of the second week, it had become a fact of the house rather than a condition outside it, present in the quality of the light through every window, in the muffled silence that replaced the usual sounds of the grounds, in the way the household had contracted around its own warmth and stopped expecting the outside world to be accessible. Lily moved through this contracted world with the practical ease of someone who had always made the best of the available space. She had negotiated a clear arrangement with Mrs. Hewitt, specific tasks, specific hours, the dignity of contribution rather than the ambiguity of charity, and she kept to it with a consistency that caused the household staff to quietly revise whatever category they had initially placed her in. She was not a guest, she was not quite staff. She was Lily Harper, who reorganized things that needed reorganizing and did not complain about the cold, and occasionally corrected Mr. Frost, the butler, on matters of household inventory with such matter-of-fact accuracy that he had stopped being offended by it. Edmund told himself he was not tracking her movements through the house. This was not entirely true. It began with the evenings. The practical geography of Ashford Hall in winter meant that the library, with its larger fireplace, was the only room that achieved genuine warmth after 7 o'clock, and they arrived at an unspoken arrangement, Edmund with his papers at the desk, Lily with a book in the chair nearest the fire, that had begun as coincidence and continued past the point where coincidence was a credible explanation. He had expected, after the first few evenings, that she would defer to the silence he usually preferred. She did not. She asked questions about the estate, about the local history, about a letter from his land agent she had inadvertently seen before he had thought to put away, with the direct interest of someone who found the world genuinely worth understanding. He answered, initially with the economy of a man who had not been asked for his actual opinion in some time, and then, gradually, with more. The conversations began to run past the point where either of them could claim strict necessity. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks in, she told him about the dismissal from Whitmore House, not with bitterness, but with the clear-eyed precision of someone who has processed a thing and arrived at its accurate shape. A misunderstanding, engineered by a member of the family with a reason to want her gone, resolved in that family's favor because her word carried the weight her position afforded her, which was none. Edmund listened without interrupting, which was not something he always managed, and found when she finished that he was angry on her behalf in a way that surprised him with its specificity. He did not say so. He said something measured and practical about references and recourse. She looked at him with a faint expression that suggested she knew the difference. Outside, the snow continued its patient accumulation, and the fire settled lower, and neither of them moved to end the evening, and the space between the desk and the chair by the fire grew, in the particular alchemy of shared winter hours, quietly smaller. The post came through on a Thursday, carried by a rider who had navigated the partially cleared road from the village with the determination of someone being paid adequately for the effort. There were 7 letters. Edmund sorted them at his desk in the order he always sorted correspondence: estate matters first, personal matters last, the implicit hierarchy of a man who had long ago decided that the professional and the personal were not equally deserving of his attention. His mother's letter was at the bottom of the stack, which did not mean he had not been aware of it from the moment he recognized her handwriting on the envelope. She had heard, through the particular channels by which his mother always heard things that occurred at a distance, about the young woman at Ashford Hall. She did not know Lily's name. She referred to her as the girl Edmund had retrieved from the river, which managed to be both accurate and reductive in the specific way his mother had perfected over decades. She was not cruel about it. She was precise, which was sometimes worse. The concern was reputational. An unchaperoned woman of unclear standing, in residence at an unmarried duke's estate for an indeterminate period, constituted a social situation that required either resolution or explanation, and she would prefer resolution. The letter's second paragraph mentioned Lady Constance Vane. It did so briefly, almost parenthetically, in the manner of someone who has prepared a point carefully enough to make it appear casual. Lady Constance had been in London for the season. She was, his mother noted, still unattached. She remained, in the relevant respects, everything that the appropriate management of the Everleigh title required. Edmund folded the letter and placed it in the left drawer of his desk and sat for a while looking at the fire. The preceding weeks rearranged themselves in the letter's light. The evenings in the library, the conversations that had extended past necessity, the way the house had contracted around a new rhythm that included her, all of it now legible as something that required management rather than simply something that was. He was a duke. He had obligations that preceded and would outlast any particular winter. He had known this, of course. He had simply, he recognized now with the uncomfortable clarity of a man reading his own behavior from the outside, been failing to apply it. He was more careful after that. The shift was small, a degree of containment in the evenings, a slightly increased frequency with which he found reasons to end conversations at the appropriate point rather than past it. He did not think it was visible. Lily noticed on the second day. She said nothing. She was too precise for performance and too self-possessed for obvious reaction. But something in how she occupied the chair by the library fire became marginally more self-contained, her questions slightly less frequent, the ease of the preceding weeks present but adjusted, like a room where someone has moved the furniture back to where it is supposed to be. The evenings continued. They were correct and warm and subtly different, and only one of them knew why. Edmund's mother arrived on a Friday, the roads having cleared sufficiently for a determined woman with a well-sprung carriage and strong opinions about the importance of personal intervention. She was gracious to Lily in the way that cost nothing and communicated everything. The introduction in the entrance hall lasted perhaps 4 minutes, a warm smile, a few well-chosen questions about Lily's recovery, a brief expression of relief that the river had not claimed her entirely, and in those 4 minutes Lily was assessed, categorized, and filed with the efficiency of a woman who had been navigating the social architecture of the English aristocracy for 40 years and had never once confused warmth with welcome. Lily recognized it immediately. She had worked in enough great houses to know the difference. She excused herself shortly after and returned to the tasks Mrs. Hewitt had assigned her for the afternoon. And if the housekeeper noticed that Lily was quieter than usual over the linen inventory, she had the good sense not to remark on it. She heard Lady Constance's name twice through the course of the day, both times at a distance, both times in the particular tone that people use when discussing something already decided. She was not listening for it. It arrived anyway, the way facts tend to when you have been carefully not thinking about them. That evening she sat with her book in the library chair and conducted, beneath the appearance of reading, a clear-eyed assessment of her own situation. She was 23 years old, the daughter of a clergyman, trained as a governess, currently without a position or a reference. She was residing in a duke's house by the grace of a frozen river and the improbable timing of his ride along the northern boundary. She had been here for nearly a month. She had allowed the evenings to become something she looked forward to, allowed the conversations to matter, allowed herself to become, in the quiet and warmth of a snowbound house, temporarily confused about the distinction between what was real and what was simply available. She was not confused now. Lady Constance Vane was the daughter of an earl. She had a name that opened rooms, a family that complemented the Everleigh title, and a social position that made her a sensible choice rather than a complication. Lily understood the machinery clearly because she had always been adjacent to it, close enough to observe its workings, never positioned to be considered by it. Wanting something did not make you a candidate for it. This was not a bitter conclusion, it was simply an accurate one. She closed her book at 8:30, which was earlier than had become usual. Edmund looked up from his papers. "You're not tired?" "No," she said, "but I think it's time I wrote to the agency in York. The roads will be clear soon." She said it pleasantly, without weight, and went to bed and lay in the dark for a while with the particular quiet of someone who has made a decision that is correct and costly in equal measure. He came to find her the following morning, which told her he had been thinking about it overnight. She was in the morning room, the room she had reorganized in the first week, which had become quietly hers in the way that spaces become associated with the people who care for them, and Edmund came in without knocking, which was also unlike him, and stood near the window with the particular bearing of a man who has prepared what he is about to say and is not entirely certain it will survive contact with her. He presented it well. She had expected he would. He spoke about his name and what it could offer her. Security, position, the end of the uncertainty that her situation currently represented. He acknowledged the irregularity of what he was proposing and addressed it directly, which she respected. He spoke about the social problem her continued presence had created and framed the proposal as a resolution that benefited them both. He was honest about the practical architecture of it in a way that another man might have disguised with more palatable language. She listened without interrupting until he had finished. Then she was quiet for a moment, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to be precise, and what she was about to say deserved precision. "I know you mean this genuinely," she said. "I want you to understand that I know that, because what I'm going to say isn't a judgment of your intentions." He waited. "I will not be a problem you have solved." She said it without anger, which was harder than saying it with anger would have been. "I will not be the woman who accepted a duke because she was pulled from a river and had no better options available to her. I will not look back in 10 years at the decision I made at the lowest point of my life and wonder whether it was a choice or simply the only door that was open." She met his eyes. "You have given me every practical reason to say yes. You have given me no other kind, and I find that I am not able to accept practical reasons as sufficient, not for this." Edmund was very still. "If there is something else," she said quietly, "something that has nothing to do with my situation or your reputation or the social arithmetic of the thing, I would ask you to say it now. If there isn't, then I think we both know what I have to do." He did not speak. She watched him not speak and understood what that meant, and felt it cost her something she had not fully admitted she had. "Thank you," she said, "for the river. For all of it." She packed her bag that afternoon. Mrs. Hewitt embraced her briefly in the kitchen corridor, which neither of them remarked upon. The carriage came at 7 the following morning, a gray March dawn with the last of the winter still in the air. Lily did not look back at Ashford Hall as the carriage pulled away. She had decided she would not, because she knew herself well enough to know that if she did, the decision would cost her twice. The house ran exactly as it always had. This was the first thing Edmund established with the methodical thoroughness he applied to assessments that mattered. Mrs. Hewitt managed the household with her usual precision. Mr. Frost oversaw the staff. The correspondence arrived and was answered. The estate accounts were reviewed and the relevant instructions dispatched. The machinery of Ashford Hall, which had been running without interruption for 11 years under his stewardship, continued to run. He could identify nothing wrong with any of it. He wrote to his mother. He made the appropriate overture regarding Lady Constance through the appropriate channels. He attended to the Hargreaves matter and 2 others that had been pending since January. He rode the northern boundary on Tuesday morning, which was usual, and did not stop at the bend where the river crest curved beneath the old stone arch, which required a small and deliberate act of will he did not examine too closely. The morning room bothered him, not in any way he could make specific. It was simply that she had reorganized it, and the reorganization was better than what had preceded it, and now, every time he passed through it, he was aware of her reasoning in the arrangement of things, the logic of it, which was her logic, present in the room in her absence like a signature. He considered having Mrs. Hewitt restore the original order, and understood immediately that this would be worse rather than better, and did not pursue it. The library was more difficult. He worked there in the evenings as he always had. The chair by the fire was simply a chair. He was aware, with the precision that had always been his most reliable instrument, and was currently being applied to a purpose it had not been designed for, of the exact quality of the silence where the conversations used to be. Not silence as an absence of sound. The house had always been quiet in the evenings. Something more specific than that. The silence of a room that has held a particular kind of exchange and now does not, which is a different register entirely from the silence of a room where that exchange never occurred. He tried, with the methodical persistence that had served him well across 32 years and was serving him poorly now, to locate the practical edges of the problem. He had made an offer. It had been declined. The situation had resolved itself as cleanly as such situations could be expected to resolve. Lily Harper was in Wexford, pursuing a position through the York agency, which was the correct and sensible outcome for a woman of her circumstances. Lady Constance was in London. Everything was in its appropriate place. He sat by the library fire on a Wednesday evening in the 4th week after her departure and found this for the first time in his adult life that precision was not helping. The feeling did not have a practical shape. He had been attempting to give it one for 4 weeks. It was becoming apparent that this approach was not going to succeed. He looked at the chair by the fire for a long time. Then he went to find his coat. He found her on a Thursday afternoon in a narrow lodging house on the better end of Wexford's main street, in a sitting room that was clean and adequately heated and entirely without distinction. She was at the writing table by the window with correspondence in front of her, 3 letters, by his count, in various stages of completion, and she looked up when the landlady showed him in with the expression of a woman who has been surprised and is declining to show it. She did not stand. He found he was glad of this. It removed the choreography of rank from the opening of the conversation, which was the choreography he could least afford. "Your Grace," she said, with the careful neutrality of someone who has not yet determined what register this visit requires. "I'd rather you didn't," he said. She waited. He had ridden 4 hours. He had spent a considerable portion of those 4 hours constructing and discarding various versions of what he intended to say, which was not a process he was accustomed to. He had been preparing remarks for difficult conversations since he was a boy, and they had always arrived in good order when required. Nothing he had prepared survived the sight of her at that writing table, composed and self-sufficient and entirely herself in reduced circumstances, and he was left, for the first time in recent memory, with only what was actually true. "I made you a practical offer," he said. "You told me that practical reasons were insufficient, and you were right, and I didn't. I wasn't able to give you anything else at the time." He stopped. "I've spent 4 weeks attempting to understand why I wasn't able to, which is longer than I have spent attempting to understand anything in recent memory. I'm a methodical person. I applied method to it. The method has not been useful." Lily said nothing. She was watching him with the clear, steady attention she gave to things that mattered, and he found it simultaneously easier and harder than speaking to a room that wasn't listening. "The house is very quiet," he said. "In a specific way, it was not quiet before. I am aware of the chair by the library fire and the morning room and approximately 14 conversations that are no longer occurring, and I cannot locate a practical framework for any of that, which suggests to me that the framework is the wrong instrument." He met her eyes. "I am not here about your situation. I am not here about my reputation or the social problem or anything that has a clean resolution. I am here because I should have said something true when you asked me to, and I didn't, and I am asking whether it is too late to say it now." The room was very still. "What is it that you want to say?" Lily asked. Her voice was careful and entirely serious. "That I would like you to come back," he said, "not to Ashford Hall, not as a solution, to me, because the alternative is a life that runs exactly as it always has, and I find I no longer want that with the certainty I used to." He offered nothing else. No rank, no resources, no resolution, only the plain and imperfect truth of it, standing in a Wexford sitting room without a prepared speech for the first time in 32 years. She did not answer immediately, which he had not expected, and which was, he realized, exactly right. She looked at him for a long moment in the thin morning light of the Wexford sitting room, the modest lodging, the practical furniture, the window that faced a gray street rather than the grounds of an estate, and he had the sense of being read with the same clear-eyed attention she had turned on everything since the morning room, the same refusal to mistake what she wished for what was actually there. "You said nothing to do with the river," she said finally. "Nothing to do with the river. Or the practical arithmetic." "No arithmetic." She was quiet again. He waited, which was also new. He was not accustomed to waiting for things without attempting to manage the interval, and found that he could do it, that the waiting was something he was willing to sustain indefinitely if the alternative was returning to Ashford Hall and a chair by the library fire, and the 4th week becoming a 5th. "I need to ask you something," Lily said, "and I need you to answer it accurately rather than well." "Yes." "If I had left the river on my own feet, if we had met in an ordinary moment at an ordinary moment, with none of this," she gestured briefly at the space between them, at everything the winter had constructed and complicated, "would you be in this room?" It was the question he had been asking himself for 4 weeks in various forms, with the precision he had applied to everything, and which had, on this particular question, consistently arrived at the same answer. Yes, I believe I would have found my way here considerably sooner. The river slowed me down. It gave me a framework to hide inside. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a particular quality of attention he had learned over the course of a long winter meant she was taking something seriously. I don't know how to do this. I want to be clear about that. I don't have a model for it, and I won't pretend I do. Neither do I. And there are 100 reasons it is complicated. Yes, I'm going to need it to be honest, consistently, not just at the beginning. That is the only version I'm capable of offering you at this point. You appear to have made the other kind impossible. She looked at him for another moment, then something in her face arrived at a conclusion, and the conclusion was, quietly and without ceremony, yes. They did not mark the moment grandly. There was no gesture that the occasion demanded, and they both, being who they were, would have found suspicious. They simply sat in the plain morning light of a modest sitting room in Wexford and began carefully and without a social script between them to discuss what came next. It was, Edmund thought, the most useful conversation he had ever had. And outside the gray window, without any particular drama, the first suggestion of spring moved through the street below, unhurried, unannounced, arriving exactly when the long work of winter had finally, honestly, been done.